back in 2018, I had got my children removed from me. I was staying with my sister. Me and my niece had gotten to it. And at the time, I was 26 and my niece was 15. When diapers did come the week later, they had said, basically, you have to choose between your daughter and your sister. And my sister made the choice. As soon as diapers left, she said, you have to get out my house. This was at 10:30 at night. I have 3 children. I had went into a hotel, and when I came out the hotel, I seen one of my other friends, and they said, wow, my mom had just passed, so I have another house. And they said you could come there with your children. That same night, I had my income tax money finally came. Now I could probably put a down payment or pay for security deposit. Okay. So I take my kids to school that Monday, happy-go-lucky. And at the time, my children were 9, 7, and 2. When my kids went to school, me and the 2-year-old out all day. Now it's the end of the day. Now it's time to go pick up my 7 and 9-year-old. And next thing you know, as I'm pulling up to the school, I see 2 diapers workers. I see my 2 kids. Hi, Mommy. They don't know anything. Hi, Mommy. And then I see 2 officers. They have a paper and they said, well, we're here to remove your children from you. And I said, why? We have a court order to remove your children from you because you're homeless. You don't have anywhere to go. Your sister told us that she put you out. And I said, well, no, I have a place to go. It's not my own, but I have a place to go. They said, well, it's too late. We have the order and we're taking your kids. So my kids is banging on the window, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. And I'm like, I can't do nothing about it. And the school that they took my kids from, this is actually a school that I used to go to. And this happened when they let school out. So it was my first out-of-body experience. I didn't know what to do. It was really heartbreaking. That was the beginning of something very traumatic.
My kid's father he came home drunk and he threw me on the air mattress that we had, and my son was in a car seat strapped and he fell off the bed. I called the cops. They came, and by then I was already beat up and had my hair was in my hands. They took us outside, and I guess they were just gonna arrest him, but I guess they saw a scratch on his arm, and he said, I did it. So they took both of us. His family was there, but they still called DYFS and they still called my mom. Me and my kid's father were arrested, and they released my son to my mom for a week until we went back to court. I remember them saying, oh, sign this paper and we'll return your son to you this evening. I didn't even understand the paper. Nothing on the paper made sense to me. I signed it because I wanted my son home. We had to do classes, anger management classes. I did parenting classes, and I figured it was all over after that. When 2020 hit, I was with the agency because I'm a home health aide and I work with disabled clients. And I worked with this man, and he was 98 years old. And I guess the agency notified him that I was being terminated, and we didn't know why. I ended up sending these letters to the hearing unit, and they said that they couldn't give me a hearing, and I was on this registry for life.
I've been doing parent-centered advocacy work in this area for a long time, as long as I can remember. I started as a law student at NYU Law. I was in the juvenile rights clinic, was representing children in New York City Family Court, but of course that involved also working with their parents. And the work that I do is really around community education, parent and family support, as well as legislative advocacy. It's really important for people to have a historical perspective around what is called the child welfare system. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which was signed into law in 1974, is the federal legislation that actually codified what we call the child welfare system. But in fact, it did not codify a child welfare system, right? If you really look at the outcomes and the experiences of children in this system, it becomes very apparent that we shouldn't even be calling it that at all. When we're talking about removing children, separating families, prosecuting people in court, what we're really talking about is prosecuting poverty.
I come through to this work through my lived experience. 26 years ago, my 2 children were taken from me, I would say unjustly. It took 2.5 years to regain custody of my children, and the subsequent interventions led me to want to learn more about the child protection system in New York and across the United States more broadly. I realized quickly that children were being set up to fail, and that angered me. They hem you up in a style, in a fashion that makes it impossible for you to get out of their netting.
There are many long-term consequences of DCPP involvement that can be negative for our clients. And one of them is the Child Abuse Registry. In 2017, the legislature enacted a statute that requires a broader range of employers to check the Child Abuse Record Information, or CARI registry. And it applies to employers who are entities or work for entities that are funded by DCF to serve clients with developmental disabilities.
You may believe it's direct contact with a child, like a babysitter or a daycare center. It's much more broad than that. You can't be a janitor in a school. You can't be a city bus driver. You can't work in a hospital. All of these places you may come into contact with a child and not be supervised during the interaction. Therefore, you're barred from having that position.
Ultimately, these registries are very destructive and very detrimental to the very thing that this whole system claims to be about, right, which is protecting children. And particularly in those situations where children do return home and their parents aren't able to economically care for them, then again, we're creating a generational issue of poverty.
There have been a couple of positive developments. In 2013, the DCP&P adopted a new regulation that allows some people who meet the statutory definition of abuse and neglect to avoid the registry, and that's a wonderful thing. The next improvement that we're hopeful for is that DCP&P proposed earlier this year a new regulation that would give people on the registry an opportunity to apply to be removed. More technically, they would have the opportunity to apply to have a substantiation finding changed to an established finding. So they could become kinship caregivers for their own grandchildren, for their nieces and nephews. They could work at a much wider variety of jobs. DCP&P provides a significant amount of data about child protection cases on a Rutgers-affiliated website. And one thing we know is that from 2017 to 2024, which is the data that's available on that site, more than half of the abuse or neglect findings the agency made were classified as established, not substantiated. So we would expect the ratio of established to substantiated findings would be similar for clients before 2013 had that system been in place. So in other words, if half of clients found to have committed abuse or neglect before April 2013 were not placed on the registry, we are hopeful that this new proposal that DCP&P came out with will provide relief to at least half of our clients right off the bat. We, of course, have submitted comments asking for some improvements, and we're waiting to see what the agency's response is to our comments and to the Public Defender's Office's comments. But we're very hopeful.
I did not know that me getting my children removed from me was put me on some type of list, so that I can't possibly work jobs that I have worked previously in the past. I worked at daycares, I worked at schools, I worked at nursing homes. I applied for a couple of them jobs since my kids got removed from me. But I just thought maybe they didn't reach out to me because, hey, maybe I didn't fit what they were looking for.
My whole life I worked with elderly, disabled kids in daycares. They emailed literally every parent that I ever worked for to let them know that I was getting terminated for this situation. It got cleared from my name, but I'm still, trying to get my life back. To struggle all those years and then have a life and get it ripped right underneath me.